Welcome everyone to this webinar brought to you by the Society of Publishers in Asia, or as many of us know it, SOPA. I'm Alan Wong, Asia Pacific Managing Editor of VICEWorld News, and your moderator today. Our discussion is about a very big topic, covering tech in Greater China. And we have a truly excellent panel of journalists who can give you an insider's view of some of the biggest topics you can think of in this space. We'll get to that in a bit. As part of the SOPA 2022 Awards, sponsored by the Google News Initiative, this webinar features winners and finalists announced back in June. May I remind you that this session is being recorded and will be shared online, including on SOPA's YouTube channel. And please submit your questions in the Q&A box. So when I did homework for this panel and looked into all the Chinese people and companies we're going to talk about, I found myself asking questions that used to have a pretty simple and straightforward answer. Should we explain who Jack Ma is or what TikTok does? Well, we haven't quite arrived at the point where these names and entities are self-explanatory, the same way that companies like Twitter or Elon Musk are. And as far as abbreviations go, TSMC is not quite as ubiquitous as something like FBI or IG. But increasingly, I found news reports about China to be able to get past what I'd call the explainer phase. And articles and other forms of content about China have been able to go deeper and deeper into the actual story and what's new. There are also certainly more of them in terms of sheer quantity from all sorts of publications. And I think this reflects the surging demand in the world for information about China and what the country does both domestically and globally. One day, maybe we can even have a book about China that doesn't have a cover in red or features a dragon. If this was the case about the US, by the way, we'd be seeing eagles and the Statue of Liberty on every book cover about the USA. So we're lucky to have the three journalists in front of us to help us understand the sea changes that a rising China is bringing about, and also uncover new and important information, especially at a time when China appears to be closing itself off from the outside world. We have Keith Zhai from the Wall Street Journal, Annie Chang from Nikkei Asia, and Huang Zheping from Bloomberg. Thank you all for joining this webinar. Well, I just said it seems to be getting harder to peer through the red curtains, so to speak, in an insular China. But clearly, that didn't stop you all from getting the scoops and inside stories. And I can't imagine a better person to talk to us about this than Keith from the Journal. So Keith won the Scoop Award for an article about how Jack Ma ran afoul of the one man he couldn't afford to offend, China's President Xi Jinping. The report has juicy details like how Jack Ma, the Chinese entrepreneur who seemed to represent China's future, offended Xi Jinping by talking too much in front of US and Chinese executives in a 2015 meeting in Seattle. Or how Jack Ma's office sent suggestions to China's leadership but didn't hear back often, just like writing love letters to a ghost. So Keith, tell us, how did you report on this incredible story?
Thanks, Alan, and thank you, SOPA. And first of all, I have to say, it's not a story I did by myself. It's a story like a team effort, with some of my colleagues, including Ling Ling and Jane. And the whole story, we spent months to talk to different people. And as everyone can imagine, it's not very easy to report, about one of China's most powerful people and the top leader like President Xi Jinping. And I guess, in lots of sense, it's similar to other investigative stories that you need to find the right people to do the reporting. But I guess in this particular case, the good thing for Jack is that he certainly has charisma and he has lots of friends, So he's also a big brother type to many people. And he enjoys being circulated by his friends, all his people, and enjoyed a lot of this type of brotherhood. So in that case, it is hard by many sense, but it's not that hard to find people who actually either know him for many years or interacted with him in different occasions. because, just because the nature for him of him, who is such a sociable person. And I do believe it, like the main character is another person or another Chinese main entrepreneur. Let's say like Zhang Yiming of the Toutiao or Pony Ma of Tencent. I think the challenge will be much tougher for us. Yeah, back to you.
How about the other part of the equation, the Xi Jinping part of the equation? The story touched on many things, and I don't suppose all of the details come from associates of Jack Ma. Were there, how did you get the story from the other side of the coin?
I think it's a very challenging question, I guess. I think in lots of cases, also because thankfully it's Jack, and his company Alibaba is probably the most well-known company in China. And over the 20 years, since the company was started as purely an e-commerce company back in 1999, the company has been having all kinds of interactions with different levels of Chinese officials in different sectors, not just, one, province, but also across different provinces, across different regulatory, territories over the years. So there have been lots of, dealings between Chinese officials and, people from Alibaba and people close to Jack. I think, because the nature of this business conglomerate and touch every single aspect of China, I think make the situation actually easier. And also because the size of the company, and the growth of the company over the past whatever years have been so glorious, and to an extent, they became too big and too ambitious, and to a point that lots of officials, they're not happy with the way the company, how the company dealt with them. So in a sense, all these factors made it easier actually to talk to officials because they have something to say about this company.
That is really interesting. I never thought of it that way. In case viewers, you don't know which article we're talking about here, the 2021 article that Keith and the journal produced was titled Jack Ma's Costliest Business Lesson. China has only one leader. A very ominous title. And I want to ask, did others in China's private sector learn this lesson? And how has Jack Ma's reversal of fortune changed the technology sector in China?
Yeah, of course. I think most of the people at least in the internet sector, at least the founders and those senior people in the company, learned this lesson in a very painful way. As we can see, not only Alibaba got affected or Jack, but also Didi, all the education platforms and etc. And so it's really about this sector as a whole. And the way Beijing did this entire crackdown is actually, for them, to Beijing or to officials in Beijing, this is actually quite smart and effective to their perspective. Because I understand the sector, business people, investors, they had, of course, people have different views. But then largely to Beijing, they believe they did it well because they effectively made the internet firms, once, they can operate beyond the laws to a certain extent and now become the puppies to the government. And there's a saying in Chinese that we call, kill the chicken to scare the monkey. So it refers to making an example out of someone in order to threaten others. But what Beijing did, if you think about it, is to kill the monkey and to scare the chicken. So making an example, not out of someone or random person, but out of a very big prominent guy in order to threaten the smaller potatoes. So the lesson that they taught Jack and Alibaba is actually served the goal for the government to tell like other, smaller players in the sector to obey and to listen. I think, like by all means, this is fairly successful campaign or lesson taught by the government to the sector at large.
Thank you. Well, the biggest lesson here is don't be a monkey. It's a terrible time to be a monkey for sure. And before we move on to Annie, I would like to ask you a last question. The Communist Party set its all-important party congress for mid-October, so it's coming up in a couple of weeks. What should we expect to see, and where does tech fit in the picture?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like I think by now I think it's fairly clear that we're gonna have a third term of President Xi Jinping, and of course, like tech has been like a major issue, like in the eyes of the government over the past like 2 years, especially. I think the way Beijing sees tech has changed. Previously, like they see Alibaba, Tencent, like Meituan, like Dianping, like all these companies as like tech companies. But now they see these companies as internet platforms. And there are broader tech firms as well, apart from these internet platforms. So the government will continue to address on things like, monopoly power of internet platforms. They want to address issues around like data, like security and personal information privacy. But at the same time, Beijing will continue to support the development in broader tech. That means like AI, healthcare technologies, and things like semiconductors. I don't think, like anyone thinks, like all these like crackdowns against tech and everything, like, they're gonna go away. But, like the whole framework, the rules under which the internet platforms operate in like that maybe continue to go through like, big challenges. And that may have like, like a huge impact, continue to have impact on values of these companies. But that said, like some of the investors I talked to, they have already started to make investments into like other parts of the tech firm. So, other words, like they're looking into like broader tech instead of like conventional definition of tech companies in China. So in this case, it means like, platform companies.
Okay, we're gonna get back to this because I have many questions for you. So one thing that we all know that Xi Jinping will be thinking about, or maybe is thinking about right now, is certainly semiconductors. And Annie was a SOPA finalist for a breathtakingly detailed look into China's semiconductor sector in the context of the US-China rivalry. So I feel like all of you here can probably nerd out on this for hours and talk about lithography machines and all that. But just to make sure our viewers understand what's at stake, and understand what this four-letter company called TSMC is. Annie, can you just tell us more about why everyone's talking about semiconductors and TSMC?
Yes, semiconductor is everywhere in our life. It's not only in our iPhones, TVs, and refrigerators, but like this one. It's actually a wireless earbud, and you can see video processing chip and Bluetooth chip all in one, and the microphone chip beneath, as well as this one. It's a Qualcomm development kit. And you can see a lot of tiny chips here, but without all of these tiny things, all the electronic devices could not be functional. And you probably hear a lot of stories about like a 50,000 car got held because of a 50-cent chip. So that's why chip is so matter to us, because it's related to our lives. And why people are talking about TSMC? TSMC is the world's largest contract chip maker. So basically it is helping like Apple, NVIDIA, Qualcomm, Broadcom, AMD to put their designs into production. Global foundries in the US and SMIC in China also do the same work. It's just TSMC currently has the lion's share in the cutting edge logic chip production in terms of mobile processors, AI chips, GPUs, or networking processors. But I would say that not TSMC itself can cover all the areas. Samsung is the largest player in memory chips, which TSMC did not make any memory chips, maybe some. Intel is the number one in server and server CPU and computer CPUs. So what I want to say is that chip supply chain is extremely long and complicated. Behind TSMC, behind Samsung and Intel, there is an extremely huge network of chip making supply ecosystems, including equipment from applied materials, Lam Research, ASML, chemical suppliers like Dow, DuPont, Merck, and gas supplier like Air Liquide, Air Products. And every chip plant needs thousands of materials and chemicals to go into that in order to make it functional. So, and not only them, but also suppliers are important. Maybe you never be aware of that even plastics could cause chip shortage. What I'm trying to say is that our supply chain is very interconnected. And I know that we always highlight on TSMC, but I want to say that TSMC is just one key player. But without such a big ecosystem support out there, TSMC, Intel, Samsung are just empty shells of plants.
Right. Lots of people do underestimate how complicated this supply chain is. And I have gadgets on my desk right now that I assume is full of chips from TSMC and other contract chip makers. And I have no idea, how many countries or companies or suppliers of suppliers are involved, as you said, in making those things possible. I want to ask you specifically about a recent news event that, really captured the world's attention. U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi went to Taiwan in early August and made Beijing, again, very angry. She met with Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen, which wasn't surprising, but she also had lunch with the bosses of TSMC and other top Taiwanese electronic manufacturers. Right, there you have it. What should we take away from the visit vis-a-vis the US-China semiconductor rivalry?
Yes, like what you say, I think US just hope to lure most of the like-minded economies to its camp from Taiwan, from South Korea, from Japan, and others. It seems now meeting chip industry executives becomes such a trendy thing to do. And chip factories actually become the most popular tourist spot for politicians. Like what you say, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visit Taipei, and you can see the delegation with Morris Chang, is TSMC's founder, and TSMC's current chairman, Mark Liu here. But also during President Biden's trip to South Korea in May, the key part of his itinerary, he also went to visit Samsung's advanced chip plants. The tour was also accompanied by President Yoon and Samsung's Vice Chairman Lee Jae-rong. The US also hope to collaborate with Japan to develop 2-nanometer chips, that is next generation, more cutting edge chips. So previously, actually, people do expect the US-China rivalry started from President Trump could kind of ease with President Biden in office. However, it seems President Biden's administration is further closing up the loopholes and try to cut China's access to advanced American technologies. Some more examples is like, if you remember last week, the US further asked AMD and NVIDIA to stop shipping their most premium GPUs used in AI computing and supercomputers to China. Not to mention earlier, they also further restrict advanced chip making equipment shipment to China. So another example, like what you bring up from the US side as well, is US President just signed the CHIP Act, if you remember. But inside the CHIP Act, there are investment terms, like if you are the recipients of American subsidies, you are restricted to invest and expand advanced chip plants in China for the next 10 years. And any of your new investments need to be reviewed by the US government. That not only apply to US companies, maybe also apply to like foreign companies as well. So we are really witnessing this great decoupling right now. And I think these efforts will definitely slow down China's tech advancement. But as an old saying goes, keep your friends close, but you keep your enemies closer. If you just shut down all these assets, in the long term, you may have no clue of what your competitors are doing. I'm not sure if it is a good long-term strategy after all.
On first sight, it does sound like a very slick and sound strategy. But then as your story about China's semiconductor industry makes very clear, the US trade war actually made China's semiconductor industry more competitive than ever. Could this move by Washington backfire?
Oh, yes. Let me just share a small example, then you could understand what's going on in China. Normally, when we want to drink milk, what do? We just go to supermarket and buy it. We are so used to that availability. However, if one day milk is no longer available in our country, what do? We have to start breeding dairy cows. We have to research on what kind of grass our cattle need to eat. We have to research on production machine of those milk, and also logistics and the cold chain to store, keep, and transport the milk with good quality control. We have to learn about the milk from start to end. So actually, that's totally what's going on in China. Previously, they had full access to best technology in the world, no matter it's from the US or from the Europe or from Japan. But take Huawei, for example, before US crackdown, actually Nikkei Asia did a study of why Huawei could rise so quickly. One of the reasons is because Huawei used all kinds of best components suppliers globally that Apple also use. And integrate those components successfully, from chips to lens, from image sensors to displays to print circuit boards. So I think these collaborations have been going on for so many decades. However, now their assets are cut or restricted, and all the Chinese companies are also aware of that risk. Oh, maybe one day my assets could be cut. So there is a national campaign to try out or use local or at least non-US suppliers, so to reduce the risk of being cutting off due to the geopolitics someday. So that brings a lot of opportunities to like smaller suppliers, startups, or some like company that you never heard of or never remember their names. Previously, they could not be SMIC suppliers or Huawei supplier or Oppo supplier. But now they get the opportunity because of these a fear that maybe I will be cutting off. So also here, we also did a study here. I want to show all of you. Huawei also itself invests very, very heavily in many material, equipment, and chip developers and design tool software companies. In 2019, it only invests or took stake in about 5 semiconductor-related companies. But after the crackdown in 2021, it made investments in 32 chip-related companies. The dark blue chart bar you can see are their chip-related investments. So, and Huawei also started to talk about a fundamental research as well as build silicon technology from start to end. So I think the US crackdown is helping China discover its vulnerabilities. However, is it easy to patch all those holes? Not at all. It will take really long time, but we can see this ecosystem is growing.
Thanks, Annie. We've talked quite a fair bit about hardware, and but one important area of China tech that's making waves globally is software. So Zheping of Bloomberg won an honorary mention for an excellent podcast about TikTok. It's multi-part and super long and super in-depth. So Ping, tell us more about what your hours-long TikTok podcast series is about, and what about the company, both TikTok and ByteDance, makes them the subjects of such a huge multi-part effort?
Yeah, so Bloomberg has a podcast series, tech podcast series called Foundering, and each season we try to profile a company and a founder who sort of went big but ran into big trouble. So for season 1, we talk about like WeWork, and for the latest season we talk about Amazon's Jeff Bezos. And for season 2, we decided we should focus on TikTok. That it all started, I guess, when my top boss started to ask me like, hey, why my teenage kids started to spend tons of hours per day on an app he barely knows called TikTok, watching like cat videos or skating tutorials. So that's when TikTok caught our attention among the global newsroom. And it was also like, I think in the summer of 2020, when the Trump administration also turned their eyes onto TikTok, because they tried to propose a ban and a fire sale of TikTok stakes to US buyers. They cited the concerns about the national security risks because it's a Chinese company. So it all sort of added together. So we went out, our reporters in Hong Kong, New York, San Francisco, and Seattle went out, do the reporting and talk to like newsmakers and stakeholders in TikTok, as well as ByteDance. So yeah, it's a six-part series. It started from TikTok's early day as a lip syncing app called Musical.ly, founded by 2 Shanghainese founders, and all the way to how TikTok hooks American teens' eyeballs, and then develop a so-called like attention economy where a top influencers, they can earn like hundreds of millions of dollars a year just through like advertising deals with big brands like McDonald's and Walmart and other like marketers. Then all the way to the summer of 2020 when TikTok landed in the crosshairs of the Washington and Beijing drama.
Right. What does TikTok's global success mean for China? And what I'm also interested in is there a lesson that Chinese tech companies can learn from the pushback that TikTok has been receiving in the US after it went viral?
Yeah, so I think TikTok is the first like Chinese-made internet service that made it globally. So ByteDance was the like new generation of tech giants that's rising in China without the stakes or like without like being backed by Tencent and Alibaba, which belong to the first generation of Chinese tech giants. So it's a like fascinating case study of how a Chinese company can like develop a globally popular services, because Tencent wanted it and Alibaba wanted it, but they kind of failed. And even if you look today, there aren't many like Chinese originated internet apps that are popular globally, maybe except from like the Genshin Impact game or the Shein fashion app. So it's among the few that's being successful, and there are a lot of lessons to learn, right? How to build a global company when your domestic culture, working culture is all focused on 996, the very like toxic working hours, and your employees in Europe or in the States, they don't necessarily get used to that, and how to deal with the data like management or data separation issues, like by installing internal firewalls between your Chinese operations and the non-Chinese operations. And also in terms of like branding and your message to the public, as well to the both Beijing and maybe DC regulators, how to be a like good corporate citizen. It's all the lessons like the China tech world are watching from TikTok.
You mentioned this Chinese fashion company called Shein or Shein. recently it had a pop-up event in the US, and then it went crazy with hundreds of people lining up for hours to get in to buy $20 dresses and $8 headbands and stuff like that. There's reports of people offering bribes to cut the line, offering as much as 50 or 100 US dollars just to get inside the pop-up events. So a lot of people know that Shein is a Chinese company. What are the lessons that Shein could learn from TikTok?
Actually, I don't think a lot of people know, especially if you talk to average like US consumers. I don't think they know or they care. And I think from the company standpoint, like POV, they're not trying to hide it, but they're not trying to publicize about their Chinese origin either. I think that's exactly the lesson they learned from TikTok. Also, in the case of like Tencent, it's trying to also tell the world that it's like a messaging app, WeChat, right? In China, it's called Weixin. It's handled by the Chinese team. Data is served like a store like locally, and then the global version is called WeChat, which is subject to another set of like terms of services. So after TikTok, companies like Tencent and Shein, they started to, I think, to try to do the risk management from day one before it really goes into trouble. So it works somehow, but when you dig deeper, it's still the same sort of like questions the regulators will ask, right? When you have a local government that asks you to hand over data whenever they deem necessary for investigation or whatever, how do you make sure like your user data is not like transferred to the hands of the Chinese governments? It's the question that's still being asked by lawmakers and the politicians in the States.
That's really interesting to know. I have a question for all three of you. So the three of you cover China, but are based in 3 different places outside China. Keith, you're in Singapore, Annie, you're in Taipei, and Ping, you're here in Hong Kong. So without being in China, what do you do to keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening there?
Maybe I'll just start. I mean, it's a very tough question, actually. I mean, like, and it's a very big challenge to lots of the reporters these days. I mean, like, lots of the reporters, I mean, for example, like our reporters, like, you know, many of them like got kicked out from China. And, you know, like reporters for many American news organizations now covering China outside of China from like Taipei, Singapore, and Seoul, for example. I mean, I think, you know, like in my particular case, I mean, I'm Chinese myself. I have lots of, you know, Chinese friends, etc. But still, like, I constantly feel like, you know, I'm losing touch from the ground. So what I've been doing is, you know, I use, I mean, you can't get rid of WeChat. It's the most important social media tool to connect yourself to any other Chinese. And also, like, I increasingly use lots of like Douyin and Weibo. I know like both of them like are beyond my age group. I mean, not beyond, like much below my age group. But I've been using lots of those, just trying to get sentiment from like real people. I feel a problem for like lots of the reporters, and including myself, is that, you know, in lots of cases, we talk among ourselves. We talk to people with a similar like mindset. That's why like people made wrong predictions against like Trump or like Brexit. So, I mean, like, I want to find out like how ordinary Chinese, especially like younger people, like how they feel about, you know, like this particular government or society. So I try to use those platforms to talk to, you know, like as many young, and not talk, but like I observe and listen, like, you know, from the other alternative group as well. And another benefit probably for being like outside of China these days, or especially in Singapore, is that, I mean, as many of you know, like Singapore to an extent became the new Four Seasons hotel in Hong Kong back in the days. There are lots of Chinese are now, you know, left China, mainland China, left Hong Kong, and now they moved to Singapore. And they are like us, the thirst of information, the thirst to know like what's going on in their homeland. And they don't have that much connections like the way they did back in China. So, I mean, you know, like I just took the benefit for being a Chinese reporter and know some part of China and then watch China more closely probably than some of them. So, I mean, like, it's also a good way to make the connection. So all I'm saying, I think, you know, like, I mean, like, at least in my personal, like, approach, I try both, you know, like, on one hand, you still have to, you know, get in touch with the roots back in China. At the same time, you always have to expand, you know, like a broader or like the increasingly broader community of business elite and etc. overseas. It's not, I mean, it's not the best practice and there's no best answer, I'm sure. Like I'm here, like I'm more than happy to hear from Zheping and
Yes. So let me step in. I totally agree with Keith that covering China outside China is extremely challenging, because previously we could still make trips to China to attend a lot of exhibitions and industry fair and meet more people and at least get a sense of what's really going on there. But right now, basically, we could only rely on the sources that we built a long time ago, and also the announcement, also get in touch with them from time to time as well. But like what I said at the beginning of the conversation, because covering supply chain, so in supply chain are all very interconnected, and a lot of Taiwanese companies, like US companies, Singapore company, Tokyo, Japan companies all have a lot of business with China. So maybe that's something we have advantage, because all the supply chain are interconnected. You need so many components to build one product. So that's why basically sometimes we could still learn a lot of information ahead of others. And also one thing is that I think normally covering industry, it's like my 2 cents is that you have to really build a relations with industry you cover. Maybe it's not only about like asking numbers or market moving things like when you need them, but really let them know that you care about them and want to know how the industry really operates. Maybe that is another, but I would say it's growingly challenging, because China's zero COVID policy as well all the political situation right now. Thank you. Back to you.
Yeah, I totally agree with like what Annie and Keith just said there. I think it boils down to 2 things, right? One is like try to leverage your existing like networks through all the sorts of like social media tools, and B is still talking to people in the real life, which is always better than talking to people on WeChat. So in the case of Hong Kong, we have like a lot of like bankers and investors here, and they're still like relatively more chatty than people on the mainland. So I whenever I get a chance to grab a coffee or dinner with them, I'll just go for it. And I have a like very interesting anecdote just to offer like about how powerful WeChat is, because the other day I was chatting with someone on WeChat. It's a private message between 2 of us, right? We talk about some industry and some company in that particular industry. And then I scan through my WeChat moments. It's like the Facebook style feed where they post like your friends post their updates and photos, etc. So after we had that like one-on-one like chat between me and my source, the WeChat moments feed started to push me like the relevant like posts about the particular company, the person we talk about in the industry we talk about. And I almost forgot I have someone in that company before I started my conversation with my source. So it's how like AI and algorithm reads us today, but in a way it also helps me like for my sourcing.
That's a little scary, but I can see where then that could be useful. I have a follow-up on this. You all talk about how you leverage your existing networks in China to try to, get understand what's going on in the country. Can you still build new sources in China without being in the country?
I think like building new sources, like completely new sources, like within China is very hard. I mean, like I guess especially in my case, because I mean, like if we talk about like if we talk about like Chinese officials in this particular case, I think that requires, I mean, the trust requires lots of like FaceTime, and I mean. So I do think like, for example, if, like in the future, like if the trips still able to happen, I mean, like if let's say like Xi Jinping goes to like somewhere like in the future, maybe like you can meet officials and, like build new connections like from the trips. But otherwise, I think, I mean, at least in my case, it's extremely hard to build new contacts in China. But that said, as I said, like the benefit being outside is that, like with the situation domestically at home, the more like people like came out from China. And these people like used to be the top tier, like elite of Chinese. So, I mean, like those people, like you wouldn't imagine like, to have like, day-to-day conversations. Those people you wouldn't imagine like to have like, dim sum together in the morning, to still be so busy and occupied and also have to manage their relationship if they stay in China. But if they come out of China, like it's in another scenario, they're less busy, not many people know them, and probably in some cases they miss the the part that people surround them, like everybody trying to go to them, so I mean, I think that also helps me in building new connections, despite like not necessarily domestically with Chinese elites, but like it's also another like channel to do that.
Ping, Annie?
Yes, thank you. I totally agree with Keith. I think it's extremely, extremely difficult to build new sources if it's someone who is a stranger in China and connect with them maybe via LinkedIn or other platforms. But maybe I can pray someone that I know suddenly got a job to work for Chinese companies that happen to be my beat. So that did happen, but they will change their job too. So I will lose my source again. So I think it's recent days, it's very, very difficult, and the COVID, so people could not meet each other, even if someone that you like constantly meet every year when you travel there, like suddenly you could not meet them for like 2-3 years, and sometimes they don't want to speak sensitive things via WeChat. And sometimes they even think that Teams is not safe, but they don't want to download other like app as well. So I think it's extremely difficult, but probably you should, ask me, like in the supply chain, cover supply chain, I should dig with like who have what kind of business relations with who. So maybe some people will still have need to travel to China or have knowledge, a lot of direct knowledge about China.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, like, it's a number game, right? And like, as long as you do it like like enough times, it will pay off eventually, although it's a painful, very long process. Like in Keith's case, maybe someone he meets at the Sentosa casino will have a link to some very influential Beijing official. Who knows, right? It can pay off sometime.
Pays me to go to Sentosa casino, but
Okay.
I'll try. I'll definitely bring this idea to my editors next time. Yeah.
Nice.
Yes, next time please bring me with you if you're going to the casino.
Yeah, I mean, like even if that, right? Like I guess we need to go to the VIP room. So like I expect, like you spend some 50, like thousands or like 100,000 first before we can actually meet with the relevant people at it. So we
Just
can
put
try
that.
Yeah.
Just put that on a corporate card. It'll be okay. So to all of our viewers here, we've been getting some questions, but if you have more questions, please do jump into the Zoom's Q&A box to ask them. I'll make sure that the panelists address your questions in a few minutes. So Keith, I do have more questions for you. You talked about the Chinese tech crackdown, and then that's obviously a big topic with the Chinese government punishing Chinese tech companies or platforms for example, their data collection malpractice or like violation of user privacy, that sort of stuff. Those sounds like things that people would want and sound like things that regulators in the US or Europe would want happen on their home soil. But in China, the story has been one that's not strictly about tech regulation, but also about politics. What's your take on that? Are both lenses to see the story correct, and which one do you think should take more importance?
Exactly. I think like as you said, right, like what China has been trying to tackle, like the monopoly power of the internet platform, data privacy, like all these issues, right, which we can see, like not only just China is trying to do that, but like we have the European government, they have GDPR and etc. The US government, like increasingly going after some of these major like platforms as well. So it's not really a Chinese thing, but I think the difference is that like China did it in a much more like blunt and like strict manner that's different itself from many other countries. So like you imagine like in other countries, there will be like consultations, like rounds and rounds of consultations. There will be like hearings and etc. just to make sure like everybody on the same boat. And then like they can roll out some of these policies. But in China, let's take the education, platforms crackdown, for example. I mean, like they pretty much like finish all these like, policy drafting and discussions, everything within like 2-3 months. And then they kill the entire sector. It's just unprecedented. It's never happened like in any other countries. So I think the different, and here we have the difference, like, I mean, and here we can bring like the political aspect into this, issue. So previously, I think China was in a different stage that, like similar to the US, like the UK and whatever, that they focus a lot on the economy. So like whatever like you do, like the core of the issues, the fundamentals are still like about the economy. But right now that has changed. The core or the fundamental is not the economy anymore, but it's the politics. So like the government, as well as the government officials, when they look at these issues, they try to address these issues like in a political way. So that's why like we can see the way China did it. It's not modern or it's not, international. It's more of a campaign style. So like they do everything like a campaign style is that like, like they finish things very fast and they go through things very fast. And at the same time, like, it's the all-in manner. So like everybody just jumped into this topic for a few months and they wrap it up like, within a few months. And also like they have a political goal for this matter. So it's not just like, like an industry regulatory like issue. It must have like a broader political move or idea to drive this like regulatory change. And that political goal in many cases is more important, like, under this new China. So that's why, like you can see like two factors here. Well, the regulatory change is on the surface, but the back end, like the supporting theories are still like the framework is still like political theories. So, I mean, if I make a quick comparison, is that, like back in the days, like in the 1960s, sorry, I mean, actually like in 2000, if China wants to build a bridge, how are they going to build a bridge? So they find the contractors, they buy all the like stuff, and they hire the workers, and they're just going to build the bridge. That's the modern way of economic thinking. Like that's how you do like economic activities. But if you put this in the context of a campaign style, that will be different. So if we imagine like back in the 1960s, how they're going to build this bridge? Among anything else, they have to find the right enemies. Who are the enemies? So and then like I need to mobilize the public and everybody like in the society. Okay, let's fight against this enemy. And then like after we fight against this enemy and people got motivated, and then they can build this bridge. So this is a very typical revolutionary. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't want to get this like too technical, but like this becoming so like this is, I'll wrap up. So this is a revolutionary like thinking that, how they do all these campaigns, how to do like conduct even like for economic activities. So like they always have this political goal behind while they're addressing this economic activity. So like in Chinese and as well, like, it's like kill two birds with one stone. I mean, you never like, I mean, it's also like fairly obvious under Xi's time. He wants this, at the same time, he wants that. He never wants one thing. And the doubt, I mean, it's like how internet citizens in China these days, they say like all the adults, they want everything. They don't want one thing.
That makes a lot of sense. And from my perspective, I think this duality of Chinese policy making is often missing in some coverage that only emphasizes one aspect of that over the other, or maybe not talk about that at all. And I want to ask Annie about this, because you cover a subject that's of interest so intense globally right now. But I have a feeling that because you know so much more than the average reader, there must be some misconceptions about semiconductors that you can't clear up from like a 800-word story. Can you tell me a few things that you think an average Joe like me would miss when I read about semiconductors?
Yes, but I think you guys are all like very like readers that read a lot of stories. I don't think I can teach you anything, but it's just because semiconductors, you always see those like nanometers, like which nanometer represents what. So basically, the smaller the size, the nanometer size, the more advanced the chip and more powerful it is. So basically, you can see all those US regulation. It will say, oh, you could not ship the tool that could make below 14 nanometer chips. So when you read that, that means that below that, like 7 nanometer, 5 nanometer, 3 nanometer grade chips, those tools could not be shipped to China. And why is that so important to make those cutting edge chips? Because like in the future, with so many data center and AI emerging, we really need like those high performance computing chips. So that we could easily do those complicated things and science research. And that is also another battleground of US and China, and also things that we're going to spaceships or like space war or like satellites in the future. And I think another thing is that people generally would think of like when we discuss about a semiconductor, like at the beginning, everyone will like only pick with 1 to 2 companies, but I would just want to say that like all the chains, all the companies are very, very important. Lack of any of them, maybe like sulfuric acid or like any kind of chemicals, like I say, plastics are all very important as well. And I think you previously did ask me a question about which company that Samsung and Micron and Kyosa are worried about or pay a lot of attention. I would say that it's definitely Yangtze Memory Technologies, because this company is making NAND flash memory chips in the Chinese city of Wuhan. And it just started back in 2016. Back then in 2017, 2018, it has 0 market share, but now it has 5 to 6% of global market share right now. So, but currently it only like feed domestic supplies. But that's something that we need to monitor, because there is no memory chip maker in the world who could grow 5 times of market share in 5 to 6 years. Back to maybe our time is like need to wrapping up.
Oh, by the way, I believe Apple's going to announce a new iPhone that uses what, 5 nanometer chips, and you're talking about
4 nanometer, but that is in the 5 nanometer family as well.
Okay. Well, we have a very technical question from the audience as well. We'll get to it in a bit. Ping, I want to ask you a version of the same story. Since you cover, ByteDance, TikTok, and also lots of Chinese gaming companies as well. What are some misconceptions that you find in how your readers react to your stories?
Yeah, I won't say it's a misconception, but it's a like very common trap. I almost feel like as a Chinese internet firm or as a like Chinese-made internet app, it almost have a like the original thing of just being born Chinese, where you come from a regime that doesn't share the same value of like Western democracy, right? And as that company, as that founder, as that particular smartphone app, when you try to enter Europe, to enter the States or India, the first reaction by maybe the public or like regulators are, hey, you're from China, so there must be something evil about you. But in Trump's case, I think that's what was pretty clear what this was about. So China equals like data collection equals like national security risk. So that leads to a blanket ban of the app, which does no good to its users, right? And speaking of ByteDance, it also has like a very powerful US investors like Sequoia, Tiger Global, and Susquehanna. They are backed by like the pension fund money of like the Chicago firefighters or like US Canada teachers, right? So a lot of like common people's interests are also tangled in this. So if you only like talk about issues on that layer 1, it doesn't help anyone. But in terms of like whether it's a risk, yeah, I think we should like usually go deeper to look at, hey, what kind of data TikTok really collects? Is it about your personal data or geolocation data, or is it your like key show what you type? And in terms of censorship, what WeChat or what TikTok really allow and doesn't allow for US users? Should it allow like political ads? Like if we like discuss more concrete questions, then it helps like people to understand the issue, right? And I think we as journalists like tend to simplify stuff because you need to explain something in 400 words with a slappy headline. So we kind of play the part in like making it staying in the like layer 1, but whenever possible, we should always try like go one layer deeper.
Keith, what do you think? I feel like as someone that covers the US-China rivalry as closely as you do, you probably have many thoughts on this.
I agree with Zheping, and I think like in lots of cases, even like when media covering like companies, I think they care less about the business logic. So for example, like in the case of Shein, right, or like TikTok, I think like people care less about like, you know, what makes Shein like a, you know, global company. I mean, like, I don't think it's because, you know, like they use workers from Xinjiang that made them like a better company compared to H&M or like Zara. But seems like, you know, people have or generally have like less thirst or interest on like how these people or these companies became successful. And which is sad and pathetic because, you know, like, I think the decoupling is not from like one side, it's from like both sides. And like, you know, and to some extent, I mean, including myself, I think media is also part of the game that driving the decoupling from getting worse because we emphasizing to an extent the narrative that, you know, like these two countries or like these greater powers are decoupling or heading towards that trend. Every day, every morning you wake up, you look at the media, you're definitely gonna see some story like, you know, oh my God, these two countries are drifting apart, you know. And I don't know. I mean, like, I don't think this can be fixed. And I mean, like, it's the nature of media, like, to get you know, attention, to highlight attention, to cover, like, you know, like the fun bits. But I mean, is this fair to the companies? I don't know. It's a tough question. And I guess, like, I mean, I understand, you know, like also not just to Chinese companies like Twitter, for example, they also have like lots of hard time, like internally to navigate this issue. I mean, like they have like, you know, like company, I mean, they have third-party companies as well, but like they're making profits from Chinese market. It's not like super big, but still like it's one of their like, you know, good performing markets in Asia. And at the same time, they're facing lots of criticisms like at home. And they're like public policy people, they may want to overpromise something that, you know, people here in the region cannot achieve or cannot do. They say, oh, we're gonna ban like all the, you know, like promotions from the government websites or whatever. But like, as a matter of fact, like, is that even possible? How, like, whether Twitter has the manpower or whatever, like to distinguish or, I mean, to define like what is what? Not necessarily. So it's not just like Chinese companies, but like all the companies they caught in this particular situation. And like, you know, and also not just like tech companies, but also like conventional companies too, like Walmart. Can they sell like, you know, dates so from Xinjiang? I mean, like to me, I think it's yummy. But is that even allowed? I don't know. Is that a new taboo? Maybe. But so if we don't really buy anything from Xinjiang, like what I mean, so how people in Xinjiang can make a living? I don't know. I think people care less. So it's when things become like political, it's getting more and more pathetic for us as, you know, humans. But I guess this is the world we're living in. And if we try harder, maybe like we're gonna have like the China-Taiwan-US conflict tomorrow. So yeah, let's see.
Way to answer your answer on such a positive note, huh? Annie, I would like to hear from you because you're sitting in Taiwan, you know, which has taken on a new moniker as the, you know, #1 flashpoint in Asia, and it feels like that it's any moments now when the next explosive revelation happens, and then we all talking about a war or an invasion of Taiwan again. So what do you think about this topic of, you know, journalists covering the conflict and being part of the force that drives the conflict?
Are you talking about the geopolitical conflict or like the
Yes.
economic conflict or
Both.
the real conflict?
I think they're interlinked.
Okay.
Yeah, you can talk about both.
Yes, I think covering this, it's very interesting because actually you are the person who is really, I think Taiwan, where I live, it's like a sandwich. It's like between US and China. China hopes that, always say that Taiwan is a part of China, and the US, you can see all these delegations coming over one after another, and all they are talking about, they are visiting TSMC, they are want this semiconductor collaborations. So it's very interesting to see how it is sandwiched between, because we are so close to China, but at the other end, our industry rely, like the flagship industry in Taiwan is semiconductor industry, but Taiwan also rely on so many US technologies from applied materials, Lam Research, KLA, all those chip making equipment company are all from the US. And the chip design tools from Synopsys, Cadence, it's all also under a US control. So definitely no semiconductor executives in Taiwan want to violate any export control regulations and make the US not happy. So, but at the other end, a lot of supply chain executives, they have manufacturing plants in China. So do you know that when Nancy Pelosi, House Speaker, visited Taiwan, I think the other day or the day after, all these Chinese plants in China suddenly get the notice that any of the shipping from Taiwan to China could not say made in Taiwan. So and if you say anything in made in Taiwan, either in the box or on your filing, could be held by them. So actually it's a massive, like, chaotic moment by that time. So it's really a lot of tension and a lot of nuances could happen. And not only us covering the industry, but also all the industries are going between.
Okay, thanks for the inside look at the messy import situation. I have one question from the viewer addressed, I believe, to you, but anyone else, if you feel like it, you could weigh in, but it's about semiconductors. In terms of Chinese chip development, which sector has China advanced its technology in, and which sector is China still behind the time? And then one more specific question from the same questioner. In terms of chip designing, where does Kunlun Xing stand in the area of chip designing? There was a recent news about SMIC to have started mass production of chips at the 7nm process, dubbed N+2. I have no idea what I'm talking about. How credible is the report, and what is the potential impact of such progress?
Okay, let me very briefly, because a little bit technical, but let me briefly explain a little bit about the SMIC part. I think there is a cryptocurrency computing chip got spotted by a consultancy, and they find that that is actually built by 7nm grade. So they realize that, oh, is that SMIC who got blacklisted by the US can produce such a cutting edge chip, because they suppose could not do that. But what I'm trying to say is that I think what they call is not mass production, but they could make so many of those kinds with like different kinds of machines. Like what I said, SMIC definitely won't like sit there and just shut down their plants. They will look into all kinds of alternatives and look into all kinds of used machines as well. So they probably could still build the kind of 7nm grade chips, but that maybe the yield means the production quality, meaning that maybe you produce 100, you only got 2 or 3 that you can use. So the yield may be still very low, but they could build those kind of things, because when a TSMC built iPhone processors, the yield could be like 90. So more than 99. So basically they build 100, they could get 99 chips that they could use. But maybe SMIC 7nm, it's just their yield is still very low, maybe below 50. But they are looking into all kinds of alternatives. Maybe one day they could build that, but I won't say that it's already in mass production right now. And so yes, that's the answer to part of the viewer's question. And I'm afraid that if I taking up too many times, just stop me, Alan. Thanks.
No worries. Okay, and one other question from the viewer, and I believe it's addressed to everyone. What do you make of the recent talk of Chinese President Xi Jinping on the new technology development of the country, specifically the new model called 新型举国体系, kind of a new national model? Anyone?
I'll just go ahead. I mean, it's not, I mean, like, I suppose like the question was made because like, you know, yesterday there was a deep reform commission, like they had this meeting during which they talk about 新型举国体制, which I think like it's interesting, but it's not something like super new, to be honest. I can't really recall, but I think like the idea was like, you know, that happened. I mean like they had this idea like since at least like 2020, if not earlier. So I mean like over the years they've been like using this as one of the key buzz phrase to address, you know, like IP challenge, for example. Also like, you know, like on cases like, you know, AI, you know, basically like for all the hardcore technology that they believe, you know, like either harder to attract international investment or, you know, like it require like long-term investment, such as semiconductors. Like, you know, they like to Xi and others, they believe like the 新型举国体制 is more relevant and more important to get these, you know, like industries to grow and to bloom. But I mean, like it's a theory. It's hard to know like whether this is even possible. I mean, if we look at the early, you know, like 30 decades of the Communist Party, it doesn't seem to be, you know, like this whole like 举国体制 is possible. I mean, like maybe they can develop the nuclear, like, you know, weapon, etc. But it doesn't mean like this theory can apply like to other like, you know, sectors, like such as semiconductors as well. And but like it is true, like over the years we see more and more of these, you know, like industries adopting this type of like system. So basically like use the state money or internet, like state resources to drive the sector from like, you know, scale up. But so far, I mean, I think this is still like early stage. I don't see anything being tested. Yeah.
Ping, anything to add? Yeah, I was just reading like Bloomberg's coverage on this like CCTV like readout, right? And there's an analyst who told us like, which I totally agree. Like he said like, you can like do the whole nation system on resources, right? It's like fixed cost, and you can pull all your resources together. But it's really difficult to do innovation like by like state-led efforts, because it's innovation and may come from grassroots or like individual startup funders. And another like reservation I have about this is like when your top boss asks for like its local officials to do something like 100%, and they might like go further to do it 200%. And then that brings trouble, as we may see in some like regions COVID zero policies. So, and recently there's some like anti-corruption efforts in the chip industry, and China's former like MIT overseer, like the minister for the tech and the communication industry minister was taken down because of corruption, right? So it makes people think. And also the other day I read that Caixin report, which is about like when too many state investors are pulling their money into like the chip industry, was it really a good thing if they are scrambling to find promising upstarts to invest to? Do they really do their like business pitch meetings or like due diligence like solidly? These are all like legit questions to ask about the whole nation system.
Should we expect to hear more about this in the coming Party Congress?
I think like whether we hear this or not, it has been like the case over the past like few years. So probably we're gonna hear more, but it's just gonna be repeated talks. I mean, like after all, this session, I mean, like the upcoming like 20大 or like 20th Party Congress, it's not about like policies, but it's more about, you know, like personnel changes, right? I don't expect to hear a lot about like, you know, like very specific policy changes in the coming months. So if there's anything, I think we still have to wait a bit of the time. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Keith, and thank you, everyone, for your insightful comments on everything China Tech. It's been an enlightening discussion, and hopefully Keith will give us the juicy details after his trip to the VIP room of the Sentosa Casino. Looking forward to that. Yeah, thank you. And thank you all for joining us, and SOPA for organizing this event, especially Christine Wong and Shi Ting. I'm Alan Wong. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
See you guys.
Thank you.